Welcome to the final programme in the current series, and this being the net, we've left creation till last. Biologist Tom Ray will be telling us why he wants to recreate evolution by breeding digital creatures on your PC. In the ever-lengthening shadow of the general election, Fenella George will be seeing what online democracy could add to the creation of our new government. And guest reviewer Vet School's Trude Mostu will be seeing if she has better luck with virtual pets than the real furry kind. Later we'll be meeting some of the inhabitants of our online world, The Mirror, as they prepare for the destruction of their virtual friends. And I'll be asking artist Jane Profit about the true creative possibilities of working on the internet. But first, until recently, spy satellites have been the preserve of governments. Not for much longer. Want a picture of Saddam's backyard or a competitor's office? Well, from next month you'll be able to task a satellite at the click of a mouse, and it could create a whole new view of the world. We're all familiar with beautiful shots of Earth from space, although they still inspire awe in those of us unlikely to see what astronauts see. However, a new breed of satellites soon to be launched will enable us to see much, much more than just blue oceans and cloud formations.
From an altitude of about 460 kilometers in space, we'll be able to see objects as small as a telephone booth, about 1 meter in size from that altitude. That will facilitate a lot of detailed information that heretofore has not been available on a commercial basis around the world.
With 1 meter resolution, we will be able to have our own eyes in the skies that are almost as good as the spy satellites. So we'll be able to see parts of the world that the intelligence community sees and begin to draw our own conclusions, make our own estimates.
3, 2, 1, drop. Take us away. TC copies.
Over the next year, 3 large American aerospace companies are launching competing systems with the aim of finding markets from the man in the street right up to national governments. Finally, the public will gain access to views that only spy satellites have previously delivered, and with a combination of digital cameras and internet-based distribution, the images will be delivered straight to your desktop. Virginia-based Orbital Science Corporation, who launched their satellites from aeroplane-mounted missiles, are one of the pioneers in the field.
The OrbView system will consist of a spacecraft along with the payload, which is the camera, launched with the Pegasus, placed into a sun-synchronous polar orbit, which means that it'll be into an orbit that will cover the entire Earth, and be able to continuously provide imagery and revisit any point on Earth in 3 days or less, downlink the imagery from the satellite at the same time that it's taking images, so that it is downlinking to a regional ground station where the imagery would be processed and then placed at the disposal of potential customers over internet, accessible by anyone who has a personal computer.
Visibility to the satellite. Okay.
These new commercial spy masters maintain that there will be countless applications for their imagery, everything from locating new homes to town planning. But industry observers think we are stepping into the unknown.
Good morning, this is Warren Foerster with Space News. I'm trying to reach Colonel Johansson. These are companies that are looking at declining U.S. defense spending and see the commercial Earth imaging business as a way to offset some of that declining spending. This is a data product that has not been available. The U.S. government has kept this type of data collected by its own satellite under the tightest security. So this is really unprecedented, and that's what has people nervous. They don't know precisely how this information would be used. The commercial Earth imaging ventures are setting up worldwide data distribution networks. They require tremendous amounts of computing capacity and data compression, and the internet plays a big part in this. And that's what has a lot of people concerned. Once this data starts flowing via the internet, it becomes hard to control where this data is going.
Once you enter our network through our website, you would see a map of the world, And through a series of mouse clicks, you would identify the specific geographic area that you're interested in. And all of the imagery that we have in our archive, we would immediately send that to you via CD-ROM, and we would bill you automatically. If we did not have an image in our archive, then the OrbNet system would automatically prompt our personnel here in our headquarters to task the satellite to generate a new image. That tasking could take place within 24 hours, and we could have the image back within our system in 24 to 48 hours and in the hands of the customer.
In 1986, I became interested in satellite imaging. And I, as a newsman, knew the day was going to come when we'll be able to have satellites in orbit, peering down on Earth, seeing what man is doing to it. And we set up a task force, and what we have been doing since 12 years now is slowly lobbying the executive branch of government, lobbying the Congress, and educating journalists that one day this technology, as we enter this age of transparency, will be an important part of our news gathering process. Now let me show you Tiananmen Square in the late 80s. What you're seeing here is a 10-meter resolution, black and white image of Tiananmen Square area. And this is the area that Chinese tanks ran over and a lot of people were murdered. And this is also the area that Western news media and all news media were thrown out because the Chinese authorities did not want the world's attention on that square. Now at 10-meter resolution, you're able to see only a certain amount. You're not going to see people. At 1-meter resolution, 10 times better at least, you're still not going to see people, but you'll be able to see cars and possible damage or crowds of people at one time.
1-meter resolution is what's on offer from this month, courtesy not only of new technology, but of a post-Cold War willingness to see this technology in the hands of private companies. Not to be outgunned by the new US commercial operations, the Russian government is already distributing 2-meter resolution images from its existing spy satellites through a British company.
The space agency in Russia, I think, perceives that the eventual release of 1-meter resolution materials will be very, very highly regulated. At this moment in time, these regulations are not in place, because the actual material type is not yet commercially available, and consequently there's no need to regulate it. But there are obviously strategic implications, not only in one country but worldwide. Every government will be interested in controlling and maintaining secrecy of strategic information over their own country.
The battle for picture quality is one thing, but control over who gets to look where will be far more controversial.
For American journalists at the moment, the hot issue is shutter control, which is who actually says when a spy satellite can look somewhere, who says when it can't. In theory, the First Amendment of the American Constitution governs free speech, and it says that if they can see it, they can talk about it. In practice, we'll have to see what sort of pressure other countries can put on the American government to restrict access for various different areas and whole countries. Israel, for example, already has some restriction agreements in place with the American government. Whether those will hold, we won't know.
The times during which shutter control is most likely to be exercised are also the times when sales are likely to be the most brisk. For example, if tensions heat up in the Kashmir region. During these times, one would expect that the market demand for this type of imagery would be at its peak.
We would anticipate that there will be some bad guys out there who would want to have imagery to use for circumstances or situations that would not be in the U.S. national interest. We consider ourselves patriots in our own country, and we would not like to have our imagery fall into those hands. But as a general rule, we are operating a commercial business, and we hope to and we plan to sell imagery to any authorized customer, anyone who's using our imagery for legitimate purposes, certainly.
Socrates one time said that man must rise above the clouds and look back upon the earth. Only then can he truly understand the nature of things. High-resolution imagery may finally enable mankind to look down on Earth and truly understand the nature of things. Now it's up to governments and rational people to decide how that's managed.
Strolling through a virtual art gallery undoubtedly has advantages over being herded through the rarefied rooms of the real thing. No craning over the woman with the big hair to see the finer detail. No listening to art balls deconstructing some indecipherable daub. And no entrance fees, at least not yet. And when it comes to creating art, there's always the promise that replacing the paintbrush with the PC will turn even the most hopeless dabbler into a digital Leonardo. But if you turn oil paint into pixels and marble into 3D models, aren't you losing something? It may be interesting, innovative, even experimental, but is it art? It's a deep question, and Jane Profit, one of Britain's pioneering computer artists, is just the person to tackle it. Jane's current project, which she created for the World Wide Web, is Swarm, which uses images of bees, beehives and their swarming behaviour as a metaphor for her ideas about our collective memories and consciousness. But one of her best-known works is Technosphere, an online world which lets visitors create their own digital creatures which graze and breed.
Most importantly with Technosphere was to get people to bond with the project in some way. So you came into the website, you designed an artificial creature, put it into a three-dimensional fractal world, and then it sent you messages. Partly it was an exercise in relinquishing control, really, of an artwork.
Is that something that you see as developing out of the use of digital media, the web, internet and so on?
When I make a piece for a gallery, then I'm often making work which the viewer can explore and can therefore trigger off sequences or find images and sounds, but then usually not adding anything of their own to the piece. What working on the net has offered me is a way of the user's behaviour and the user's ideas actually being incorporated into the work. And it brings with it a whole set of sort of problems and questions as well. With other types of applications of the technology like 3D modelling, then it's a really great way of exploring and generating impossible objects, things you could never model in the real world. And I think that's where sort of flights of fancy really come into play.
There's this promise, this suggestion that you can use computers, even if you're colourblind and uncoordinated, to produce art or something that people will be excited about on some aesthetic level. Do you think that's true?
I think it's true up to a point. I think there's a whole list of questions or statements like that we keep hearing, that the web's empowering, it's a democratic media, that it connects people globally together, that are true in part, but there are always limiting factors. Maybe you don't need to have a large studio space in which to work, and you don't need a large space to store your work or wait for your paint to dry, but you still have to develop a degree of skills. When it comes to working with the technology as an artist, then you're often working with scientists just in order to be able to produce your work.
If I said to you that, for example, doing an experiment into artificial life sounds as much to me like the sort of research and development that they might do at the Media Lab or even within a company like a software company like Microsoft, rather than art, what would you say in response to that? How does this is this distinguished from something that, as it were, a researcher or scientist would do in a lab?
Well, I'd probably give you a series of different answers, and one would be, yes, you're right, it's just the same. And another would be that maybe it's about the underlying drive or the underlying considerations of making something which doesn't necessarily have a commercial value.
What, you mean the motivation of the person who's doing it?
Yeah, the motivation,
right.
the set of concerns.
Quite often this stuff is sponsored by computer companies, and it ends up effectively being used as an advertisement for the capabilities of the machinery that's
Yes.
used. Is that not something that actually undermines the motivation, that what you're really doing is exploring sort of forms of human expression here? What you're really doing is exploring machines to see what they're capable of doing so you can sell more of them.
Well, I think it's quite a complex relationship, and there are lots of artists that have problematic relationships with commercial environments or commercial organisations.
Presumably that's nothing new. I mean, every
No.
artist has had to cope with that
That's
relationship.
right. If you go back and look at painters developing new pigments in conjunction with early chemists, then maybe that's a similar or parallel example.
If, though, one of the features of the work of a work that's produced in the digital domain, a virtual work, is that there's no original, that it's endlessly copyable, that it's malleable, that it's ephemeral. How do you reconcile that with what, to most people, are the most distinctive features of art, that they're things that are physical, that they sell for millions of pounds in Sotheby's?
Who defines what art is? Is it the artists that are making the work, that are saying, this is art, even though you can't sell it through the gallery system? Or is it a much more traditional commercial gallery system that's saying, this is art because it's worth X amount of pounds, and its value will increase according to how rarefied it is? And that debate's been going on for a long time. I think we're revisiting it now in a very potent way when we start to think about marketing virtual art objects.
With such a profusion of new ideas and new thoughts, new experiments, new works coming out, do you think there's a need, as it were, for a curator or set of people who can help pick out the best stuff, basically?
I think sometimes it would be a useful filter, but that one of the pleasures of exploring the internet is also the things that you stumble across without any kind of prior knowledge. And one of the problems with having highly curated environments is that some work never gets seen.
I mean, is there good or bad art on the internet? Is that meaningful?
I think there's artworks that you'll engage with, and there's artworks where you'll jump off the site within 30 seconds. And what's really great about it is the user decides whether they like or are interested in engaging with the work. And if it's art to them, fine. And if it's just a kind of fun game to them, that's okay as well.
Politics in Britain is still a very old-fashioned, analogue, one-bit process. Every 5 years or so, you get to put a cross on a piece of paper and hope for the best. This election, however, is different, in that it's the first to take place since the invention of the web. So what can an online community, well used to voicing opinions and making decisions on the net, expect this time round? Will we just be better informed voters, or empowered point-and-click Democrats? The 1996 American presidential election saw huge websites dedicated to the campaign from both candidates and news organisations. An estimated 11% of the voting public visited them at least once. In comparatively unwired Britain, the first general elections site, GE97, was launched last month by Online Magic in association with The Economist.
The experience in America was that the sites were bombarded on the final days of the election. Certainly we'll be taking precautions to make sure that we have sufficient network bandwidth and capacity to cope with audience demand. I think that as far as possible we want to be a complementary medium with the other media, and we want to complement the other sites, rather than just simply to throw up another competing site which apes old media and offers nothing different.
At least 4 other general election sites are expected to spring up as the campaign looms. The Guardian launches their site this week.
I think what's the really exciting thing, and what will be a real success, is if you can suddenly show people this is not politics as usual. This is politics where you can make intelligent decisions based on plenty of information, which is provided in a well-edited and reliable way by The Guardian.
What we can do is offer levels of interactivity. We can give a depth of coverage which isn't available with traditional media. We have forums where people can debate, and they'll be able to talk to politicians, debating the important issues of the day. We've got polling, where people can come in and cast a vote on the issue of the day. They can cast a vote on a straw poll for the party they want to support. And we're asking people to contribute their thoughts, their ideas on the various constituency campaigns going on around the country. A site like this provides a medium for them to participate in a way that ordinarily they'd just spectate.
So when people read The Guardian and say, OK, I'm going to have a look at the online Guardian, if you like, what extra stuff are they going to be getting?
Well, it's not so much about extra stuff. I mean, what we will have on the site is we will have details of every party, every constituency, all the big issues, all the major parties' stances on all the issues. We'll have interactive sections where people can discuss all the big policy areas, can even play daily quizzes and games. We're going to have a history section so people can look at coverage of all the elections since 1945. And it's not just about covering these things, because a lot of this coverage will appear in the newspaper throughout the time. But it's being able to get exactly what you want, when you want, and that's what the website will offer.
Just providing more information for online voters is one thing, but is there anything that the interactive nature of the web can bring to the democratic process itself? Pressure group UK Citizens Online Democracy believes there is.
We've got a speciality, and that is bringing politicians together around a virtual table, so that politicians can have the opportunity to answer questions about particular political topics, and that the public can then interact with the politicians. So this will be a first time for us here in this country with something quite as complex as this, because we've got 13 national parties involved. We started off from the premise that we're not trying to change the system of democracy, we're just trying to enhance it and improve it. I think that it'll be very interesting to see how politicians, who are after all full-time paid to look after our interests, will respond to this new challenge, because it will be a challenge for them, and I think some of them will meet it very successfully and others will fall by the wayside.
But if the number of politicians with email addresses is anything to go by, the prospects aren't heartening. Only 51 out of 650. One politician who is online and even has his own website is Labour's advisor on the information superhighway, Stephen Timms.
At the moment, there is a cynicism which potentially is quite dangerous for the future if people don't think our democracy is worth taking part in. And the new technologies seem to me to offer perhaps the best hope that we can give people that stake in the way Britain is run.
Encouraging people to participate in the current system by emailing their representatives is one thing. But how does an MP feel about the more radical approach of direct democracy? Do you think we'll ever get to vote directly on issues via online technologies?
Well, I think online referenda as a means of gauging public opinion, they have some value. I would be nervous about them becoming a means by which we directly make decisions, because I'm not convinced that they reflect the considered views of the people taking part. I think we, in making our decisions about laws, need to have a more considered process than that.
Online referenda via phone, the net or digital TV are technically feasible. Perhaps one of the reasons why MPs are instinctively hostile is that direct democracy would put them out of a job. But with participation rates in the electoral process at an all-time low, there have to be other possibilities. Architect and designer Alex McLean is developing a virtual reality parliament for the internet.
I think politicians are still fairly sceptical about this sort of technology on the whole, and if you show them a virtual reality model, obviously there's still a certain amount of amusement about what this might mean for Parliament in the future. In the next few years we're going to see a lot more people able to access this sort of technology. It's going to become a lot more run-of-the-mill. And if VR presents a friendly front end for all those, that information database and for all those communications, then maybe it'll help get the public involved. It'll actually engage them. It'll give them something more interesting to look at.
Well, Alex, this is your virtual parliament. Can you just actually show me how it works? Take me through it, as it were.
Okay. Media organisations, MPs and Parliament itself could have notice boards where they'd put in new information, update it, like web pages. The idea is to have a live video link.
So what about actual interaction with MPs?
You would see the images of the politicians who are taking part in that debate. Click on those images and you're into the email debate. The version on the net that we'll be developing is going to contain avatars so that you will actually have a virtual representation in that space.
So you could actually be chatting to John Major without knowing
and not actually knowing it, yeah.
What a great idea. The chances of speaking directly to John Major this election are next to zero. British politics still worships the old ways of the TV soundbite and the parliamentary slanging match. And although the main parties now have large websites, they tend to exist as campaign bandwagon machines with flash multimedia tools being used to slag off the other side. But with large numbers of people now exercising more and more of their decisions online, digital democracy will surely find its place.
Now, it may be that you are just concerned about the number of sleeping policemen in the local streets, in which case it should be possible for you to enter a discussion of people with like mind, and that your local elected representatives, because I think local would be more appropriate for that kind of subject, would be able to take note. So it would be a way for our politicians to gauge what public opinion is, like an enormous postbag, but a public postbag, so that everybody can see what everybody else is saying.
On Earth, life began between 3 and 4 billion years ago, but it remained as microscopic single-celled bacteria, algae, protozoa until about 600 million years ago, and then there was a sudden transition that we call the Cambrian explosion of diversity, where large multi-celled complex organisms appeared. And I'm interested in that process and trying to get something analogous to that to happen in digital evolution.
Tom Ray is a biologist with years of research into the ecology of tropical rainforests, but the study of existing nature cannot reveal the most fundamental puzzle of evolution, the ever-increasing complexity of organisms. To do this, Ray has turned from the rainforest canopy to the computer, to the field known as artificial life.
There's only been a single evolutionary unfolding on Earth that created the great tree of life. That is the species diversity that we have on Earth, but that's only a single evolution. It would be nice to travel to other planets and look at the evolution that occurred there, but of course we can't do that. So one thing we can do is start the process of evolution again on Earth in the computer. In the rainforest, I could see the products of evolution, tremendous diversity that had been produced by the process of evolution, but I was never able to see the process itself. Only the products, because the process is so slow, it occurs over many generations, and I live only a single generation.
Ray's brainchild is Tierra, the most ambitious attempt to model the process of evolution ever made. It all starts with the creation in the computer of the equivalent of primitive life forms, digital microbes in the form of tiny pieces of software.
What I have is self-replicating computer programs. The analogy to the DNA is the bit sequence that makes up the instructions of the computer program. And the computer program is designed so that it copies its own code to another area of memory. So that's like replicating the DNA molecule in organic life. So you have self-replication, and the population begins to turn over the generations, and the evolution unfolds. In organic evolution, the genetic variation comes by replacing nucleotides in the DNA, and in digital evolution, we replace ones with zeros or zeros with ones. So it's the same kind of mutation by replacement of the things that make up the sequence.
Organic evolution takes place within complex ecosystems of thousands of species and hundreds of habitats. An expanse impossible to replicate in a single computer. So the Tierra project will release its digital organisms into the internet, where they can roam and migrate between any host computer that holds the software.
It allows me to scale the project up so that it'll be large enough to support an entire ecosystem consisting of, say, hundreds of species, each of which would have a substantial population of, say, hundreds of individuals. I see it as an analogy to the wildlife reserves in the rainforest. This is a wildlife reserve for digital organisms. If we can get a similar increase in complexity in digital evolution, we should be able to go out into digital nature as naturalists and look at what evolution has produced and find applications for the complex information processes that have evolved there.
Tierra will not simply release digital organisms and then watch how they evolve and behave. Ray is committed to exploring the fundamental question of why life forms become more complex. To encourage this, he has included his own selective pressures that mimic the catastrophes that occur in nature.
there's this tendency for selection to favor the fastest, simplest reproducing digital organism, and so selection would tend to cause them to get smaller and forget about the net and just reproduce quickly on the local machine. But I want to encourage them to develop adaptations to movement on the net. So by occasionally killing off everything on a machine, I provide a selective force that absolutely favors mobility, because if you evolve into a non-mobile form, you're doomed. You can't survive in the long run.
Selecting for this trait of mobility may well create mass behaviour patterns within the whole Tierra population.
For the digital organisms, the analogy of energy is the processor power of your computer. And when you're using your computer, the processor is busy and the digital organisms don't get the energy. But when you're not using the computer, they get the energy, and so they can be active. So we might expect them to move around the planet on a daily basis, staying on the dark side where people are sleeping, and the processors are idle so they can get all that energy. Their sunshine is from your computer's processor. I think in the immediate future, I would expect evolution of things to be more skillful in navigating the net. For example, if they could predict network traffic loads or network traffic conditions, that would be very much to their advantage. So if evolution could produce such a piece of software, that's something that there would be an application for right away. But in the longer term, I really can't imagine what they might be evolving into.
Digital creatures and artificial life aren't restricted to academic projects like Tierra, so we asked Trude Mostu from TV's Vet School to review the new phenomenon of digital pets.
The first package is called Creatures. You breed your own small creatures called norns. You hatch these small eggs. You can choose what egg you want to use, and they got different sexes. I can put this egg in an incubator and the egg is hatching, and this norn will appear. And you have to teach this norn how to eat, when to sleep. You've got all the different factors that would influence a life form, but it's actually up to you to start off things and to do things, otherwise this little creature will die. Depending on what sort of egg you're hatching, you can get different types of personalities of these norns, which is quite fun actually, because you can actually end up with a mutant. You can end up with a quite psychotic one, very intelligent one, a very stupid one. You can teach it to communicate, and you can train it. It's exactly the same principles as when you're training a puppy. If it's doing something wrong, you can slap it. In general, I think it's a quite good idea, especially for children. You can almost feel sad if it dies. This is the latest craze in Japan. It's called Tamagotchi, and it means lovable egg. I'm the first one to have one in Britain, and I'm very proud of that. I wish I understood how it was working. It would be very helpful with an English instruction coming with it. But there you go. The principle is that you've got an egg, and you're trying to care for this egg and make it hatch into a chick. This chicken can also produce feces, and you have to try to get rid of them, which I am not very good at. As you can see, there's loads of them there. You're caring for this egg for a long time, and if you're really good, cleaning up after it, feeding it properly, you'll end up with a big chicken on here. And apparently in Japan, you know, that makes people really impressed if you can show that you managed to raise a chicken. Now, I just can't understand how this can be so popular. Maybe it just reflects that Japan, that it's got so many people there. Instead of a pet, this is what they come up with, a little electronic chicken. Whether that's going to be popular in Britain or not, I haven't got a clue. I wouldn't think so. Do you want to see my fish? I'll eat it. This software package is called Cybertation. It's based on playing around with genes in general terms. You can combine different combinations of DNA pools and gene pools, and you will end up with different shape and forms. The most popular ones you can actually send to other people or show to other people via the internet. They can actually load it onto their own program and breed it with other kind of gene pools.
It really depends on how many genomes you start off with, how complicated the creatures are. These things you create here, they haven't actually got ears and noses and legs and arms like these have. So I think it maybe would be more fun if you could actually mate a teddy bear with a cow, for instance, which would probably be quite difficult.
At the start of the series, we created our own online world. This week it will be destroyed. How did the people who took up residence there feel about their short life in The Mirror?
I've made some brilliant friends on The Mirror. That's the best thing about it.
Initially, I was alone, but met some characters fairly quickly. And I was surprised that there were actually real people controlling these characters.
I'm always trying to help, and the first thing Snow Crash does when he logs into The Mirror is, can I help anybody? So it's just an extension of myself rather than a role that I'm trying to play.
I made up a new character who was a rather naughty character, which is Star, and she basically is my alter ego. She's everything that I'm not in real life.
My favourite had to be Playwolf, basically because it was totally opposing to my character on that. I was sullen and depressed, and Playworld was happy and chirpy. There's plenty to do, plenty to see. Most avatars gather there as things to play around with. You can trick each other to fall through the trapdoors. Well, there was also the rocket, which I think was probably one of the best parts of the whole experience on there.
The dimensions were very much like you being a child and looking at things from a child's viewpoint. So everything seemed oversized and difficult to reach at first.
You find that there are 35-year-olds and 40-year-olds even, acting like kids.
If I see a crowd, I will join in, and hopefully some of the usual suspects will be there as well.
Snow Crash, Flower, Saucy, Sliggy, of course. She's the web goddess.
Last Friday, at least my avatar, Sliggy, got married in Power World to Sluggy, who she met on her first day.
I was bridesmaid at Sliggy and Sluggy's wedding, which was interesting.
It was really funny, the service, and it kind of ended up, instead of "you may now kiss the bride," it was "you may now collide with the bride," because of course avatars don't have tongues, too many polygons or something.
So it was easy to switch genders if you wanted to do that, and then to a certain extent to be able to mix and match outfits and come up with your own wardrobe.
When you're typing away to whoever, you're typing what you think in your mind and not actually what you would do or say in real life. Sometimes you think deeper than the avatar you're talking with. You wonder what that person might look like in real life. I made a bad assumption that everybody was male and had a few shocks when I realised that the real life people behind these avatars were female.
I don't feel at all threatened there. I'm on equal footing with men. I can hurt them just as much as they hurt me.
It was interesting to see that most people tend to side on naturally towards being nice as opposed to being aggressive in mud. So that was an interesting thing that came out of being another person.
The end of the world is nigh, and I feel fine, to quote something. But yeah, I'm going to miss The Mirror.
We really only have a few days left of The Mirror, and I'm going to miss it like crazy.
I know there are planned rebellions. Let's all shift bodily to another shared world, and I think there are plans afoot for people to keep the same spirit. And I think a lot of people have made some very good friends, and they would not want to lose that. It's very strange having a sense of community with people you've never seen, but that seems to be happening at the moment.